Hello everybody, my name is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. Today, as you can see, finally with Armory, since the deck is basically better and more relevant than ever now after the patch, since it is completely untouched by the changes, and recently got some upgrades with Throne Warden in the promos, and after that Quarry to make it more consistent. So yeah, it's more than overdue to talk about the deck, and I haven't paid that much attention to the archetype for a long time because it wasn't very good and didn't seem very appealing, but recently I did, and I did my best to figure out the archetype and like find the best possible list that I think exists. And yeah, let's dive into it and let me explain you guys why I think this is how Armory should be built. There's like a few minor choices that I'm not 100% certain on, and I will point that out once I cover them, but for the majority of things I am very confident in the numbers and card choices in this deck. Alright, so first off we have 4 Inspire. That's pretty standard, like everybody runs them. They just basically make the deck flow a little bit better, a little more consistent, also help a little with hitting power drops, and if they randomly enhance the stats on one of the weapons, that can make a huge difference. Getting one of these weapons, especially Runehammer, Sword, and Daisho, to like +1/+1 stats can make a huge difference on what they can handle and what they can't handle. And it's still fine if it hits one of the units, since that still gives us like a better board position usually, so it's just a nice bonus on a cantrip that makes the deck flow a little better. Next we have 4 Seek Power, especially now with 4 Quarry. That is like an absolute must to have a reasonably stable influence base, and also the deck definitely needs its fair share of power. Every time I see an Armory list with like 29 or 30 total power between like power and favors and seek and stuff, something inside me dies. Guys, I mean, come on, these decks play 2 to 3 6 drops and 1 to 2 7 drops and like 9 5 drops, so the deck needs to absolutely hit 5 by turn 5 to remotely operate normally, and usually wants to hit 6 by 6 with a pretty high percentage as well, and wants to hit 7 like before it's too late as well. So you gotta play more than 30 power in total to do that, even with Quarry and Inspire. I am pretty convinced that like the bare minimum you have to run basically is probably 32, at least if you play 1 or 2 Icarias. If you play 0 Icarias, you can probably get away with like 31 as a minimum, but even that could be unnecessarily destabilizing the deck. I am currently running 32, and that might still be up to 1 power too few, but I have a hard time finding a card for a 33rd, and 32 feels alright. It just feels a little short occasionally, but it's yeah, it's definitely rather 1 power short than 1 power too much, for sure. Next we have 4 Torch, also not much explanation needed here, just one of the most efficient cards in the game, and just a great universal and very tempo efficient answer that helps the deck in the early game to like get its main game plan going and not fall too far behind before that. 4 Quarry, as already mentioned, makes the deck a lot more consistent, gives the deck more to do with its power early on, and the cost reduction can be amazing. Like getting a cost reduction on one of the 5 drops, Daisho or Icaria, is brutal, and even on like a torch, for example, having a 0 power torch that you can basically play at any point in time is great, and even getting cost reduction on the other cards is decent most of the time, because it allows you to squeeze in that one extra play in a turn that you otherwise couldn't. Next we have Rakano Artisan, another like mainstay that you find in every deck. It's just basically something to throw out there early, interact with your opponent, like trade with an early drop, keep them busy having to use like a card on them, and if you are against a reactive deck, it can start attacking for 2 and applying some pressure slowly, and follow that up with weapon pressure. Next I'm running 2 Rolant's Favor as my 31st and 32nd power. Since I think the deck can afford to run some like non-power power, and Rolant's Favor has some nice synergy with the weapons, and also just gaining 2 life in a control deck is valuable. And since I'm currently running Armorsmith, that also enables us to basically use it for free, or like play Armorsmith for free on turn 2, which is definitely nice and is a good setup, followed by like a Sword of Icaria, for example. Next we have 2 Vanquish, just basically to have some sort of hard removal for stuff like Sandstorm Titan and generally like fatties that you might have trouble getting rid of with the weapon, or getting rid of with a weapon right away, since like having to rise for a 6 power Runehammer takes some time, and you need some tempo efficient ways to deal with big units to get in a position where you can like stabilize the board and then start locking the opponent's board position out with your weapons, killing everything they play basically. I could potentially see even a 3rd removal, either like an Annihilate or a 3rd Vanquish sometimes. I wouldn't know what to cut right now, and I'm not 100% sure how necessary it is, but sometimes having like access to one more of this type of effect can be really relevant and helpful, since the deck sometimes has some tempo issues, and having another tempo efficient answer for bigger threats is really good. The fact that we got Quarry already helps a bit, because it virtually increases the amount of Vanquish in the deck a bit. So thanks to having 4 Quarry, we see our 2 Vanquishes a bit more often than before. That definitely helps already. Next we have 4 Sword of Icaria. Also nothing too uncommon here. You usually see 4 of them in every list. It's just like the first good weapon the deck gets to run. Warcry makes our units and other weapons better, so it has some nice snowballing. Together with Rolant's Favor and the Armorsmith that I'm currently running, it can do some serious work against decks with smaller units early on, and can put them into really awkward positions where they are behind early and have a hard time ever like fighting back against weapons efficiently basically. And yeah, next brings me to Armorsmiths usually. These days you don't see Armorsmiths that often anymore, simply because of space issues, and because Throne Warden kind of like took over the role of providing extra armor to make weapons last longer. And there's usually this like flag slot of like 3 units that is normally occupied by either 3 Copperhall Bailiffs or 3 Valkyrie Enforcers. I think Bailiff kind of lost a lot of its appeal since the Jido nerf, with Jido kind of disappearing basically. Like before, I was a big fan of running Bailiff simply because Jido is like by far the worst matchup of Armory, and Bailiff is like the best card that Armory could run to help that matchup, while being a solid card overall, like popping Aegis when it matters, generally making units softer to weapon by dealing less damage to the weapons, applying less pressure, Warcry helping with our weapons and stuff. It was just like a pretty good fit, and improved the worst matchup, which is exactly what you want. But yeah, with that gone, I don't think Bailiff is the best choice anymore, and to be honest, I don't really see the appeal in Enforcer at all. Like, there's barely anything I want to silence that I can't just kill or have to kill anyway. Like, especially even more so now that Champion of Chaos doesn't have 5 health anymore. You also won't need it to like stop a Champion of Chaos from snowballing, like you sometimes needed to before. But the other thing is also, like, stuff that you would normally silence, I rather just kill with Vanquish, Harsh Roll, or Weapon. So I rarely find myself in a position where all I want or need is a silence. Like, I usually rather have a weapon or a removal instead. So I would be almost more inclined to play like that third removal that I talked about, rather than adding silence to my deck. Like, basically the only thing that I can think of where silence comes into play, where removal or weapon doesn't do the job, is basically Dawnwalker. But the card is not remotely popular right now, so I don't see the need to. And once it becomes more popular, I would potentially look into adding some enforcers again, but also probably would just want some statutory maidens to stop these types of shenanigans. So if there would be like a lot of Xenon killers or whatever, I would probably want enforcers and or maidens to make the deck better against that, since killers exploits Armory fairly well. But yeah, given that reasoning, I think Armorsmith is probably the best way to go. It is a nice way to generate some tempo or catch up on some lost tempo with the deck, and makes cards like sort of Icaria and Starsteel Daisho a lot better, and generally provides a little more proactive play, and also provides some more board position to protect our weapon from attacking. Like, if they have 2 units and I drop like a sword and an Armorsmith, I can like kill one, sword survives, and then they often only have an attacker left that would even trade with Armorsmith. Like, if they attack, I just trade, and then I have a sword left, and even if it wouldn't trade with Armorsmith but still dies to sword, I can just use the Armorsmith to jump and then kill the unit with the sword next turn, where otherwise the unit would just kill the sword. So it just generates a lot of momentum for the deck. I wouldn't feel comfortable running 4 probably, simply because the card can be a bit swingy. Like, there's some matchups where it's not too impactful and too relevant if they are not that unit heavy and stuff. So drawing multiples can be really awkward. But 3 seems like a nice number. Like, 3 makes it so you have one fairly often without unnecessarily increasing the chance to draw multiples. And another thing is basically it can be like a solid desperation tutor target for Rise, to not lose tempo on Rise as you would normally do. So sometimes on 4, if you have like a sort of Icaria in play still, you can like Rise for an Armorsmith if you desperately need like some defense on board, and then you have like basically a 4 power 4/2 that gains you 2 armor, which is a decent deal if you have a weapon that benefits from the armor. And it also makes stash a bit better in situations and matchups where you're under pressure, because if you get to stash back an Armorsmith and have some armor left still, then you can just drop it for free, and even later when you have enough power to like stash plus weapon in 1 turn, and then you get to play the Smith for free. It just has some nice tempo swings with stash, rise, favor, and some of the weapons to make it appealing in some numbers, and makes it nice to usually draw 1 in a game, and in some matchups even more than 1, which is why I feel 3 is a good number. Next we have Auric Runehammer, another 3 of. Not much explanation needed here, I think. Basically everyone runs 3. 4 has the problem of just being a bit situational, since if it doesn't get any enhancements from like Artisan, Warcry triggers or Rise, it can be a bit lackluster, especially in multiples, since against some decks and some threats it just doesn't kill them, and then you have these Runehammers that line up poorly with what the opponent does, so you don't want to like go too deep on a 4-drop that can be situational. Next we have Rise to the Challenge. I am currently running 2, but what you see out there is basically any number between 2 and 4. So my opinion on that is 4 is basically unplayable in my opinion. The card is just like doesn't make up for the tempo it loses you. It basically you basically skip your turn 4 for like tutoring plus making your weapon a bit better. But that making your weapon a bit better that you tutor doesn't do anything other than make your weapon be able to like kill what you want to kill. It doesn't gain you any tempo back or anything. So yeah, I think the card basically does remotely make up for the tempo it costs you. So it is a very big tempo sink that can only be used in situations where that doesn't basically mean you die. Thanks to the tempo loss, because you just fall so far behind that over the next couple of turns this tempo loss snowballs into a loss. But I am not 100% convinced that 2 is the right number either. Like, I can see that a third might be better than 2, but I'm not sure, and currently I like it that way and I don't have the room, and also running 3 would put a little more strain on the power base, which then might be with 2 Icaria and a third rise make me want to go to 33 power total. Also, another nice thing regarding Armorsmith is that Armorsmith compared to Enforcer or Bailiff, which I forgot to mention, is that the fact that it doesn't cost you 3 power. It usually costs you 0 power, so unlike having another medium clunky 3-cost card that you have to like find the time and power to use, you have a 0-cost card that lets you do more things in the same time as it would allow you if Armorsmith was the typical 3-off of Enforcer or Bailiff. But yeah, back to Rise. I currently feel fine with 2, but I'm not 100% certain on 2 versus 3. So that's something that I leave up to other people, or will maybe form a stronger opinion in the future, but for now 2 seems fine. Also, like in theory and based on the logic that I gave, 2 makes more sense than 3, but it might be that the card is just like good enough and the deck can afford it often enough to use it that 3 is fine. But yeah, please don't play 4 unless you just, the format basically is all reactive decks and nobody does anything to pressure you and you have all the time in the world, then you can play 4 and just tutor around all game to eventually kill your control opponent or whatever. But then again, against decks like Fan Control, you hardly need 4 Rise to the challenge anyway to beat them, because you just crush them with whatever you have, basically. And yeah, next we have 4 Harshwell, also pretty standard. I occasionally see lists that run less. I think that is almost always very wrong. The card is the big catch-up play of a deck that mostly plays from behind up until then, especially against decks that present a lot of board and put you under pressure. You absolutely need Harshwell to catch up, and once you Harshwell with a weapon already, with a relic weapon already attached, or attaching a relic weapon after, is usually the turning point where the opponent sort of starts getting locked out by your weapons, and then you stash after that, and then the game is over. So yeah, Harshwell really important. I can see playing less if the format is like super unit light, which I haven't seen since open beta started, so I think people that don't run 4 Harshwell are just making the deck so much weaker and inconsistent basically in dealing with pressure. Next we have 2 Smuggler stash. That's also pretty standard by now. I rarely see people run less or more. I would definitely not recommend less, since the card is like one of the big game enders, usually in like the mid game when the game is kind of stalled out. Both players like are not really pressuring each other, and nobody is like particularly ahead or behind. The stash is basically what puts the game away. You just stash for like 3 to 4 cards, and then a lot of opponents just like instantly concede because it's impossible to beat. And yeah, sometimes I see lists that run more, I think if I wouldn't run any Icarias, I could see running a third. Otherwise, I can only see running more if the format is like very slow and it's basically like a slow control and slow mid-range and control slugfest, and then you have the time and the need for more stash. Otherwise, I would probably only consider additional stash in the sideboard, since the card is, after all, take some time to have enough stuff in the void to be playable for value, and then also is a huge tempo sink basically. Next we have Throne Warden. The agreed upon number here is also currently usually 3. I tried 4. The problem with 4 is the deck already has like 9 5-drops as is, and adding a 10th is not great. Like, if you don't run any Icarias, I can see running 4, since the card is actually really good. You just kind of have to balance your curve. But yeah, without Icaria, I can see reasons to just sort of, rather than play the power punch play of Icaria, to just play more of the good value utility cards to pull ahead that way, and adding a Force Warden would be one of those cards, since it stabilizes the deck fairly well usually and makes your weapons much better, and against control decks is a pretty nice threat thanks to Aegis. And it's also a really great target to stash. But yeah, under normal circumstances, 3 is the number that you will usually see, and that makes sense given the curve of the deck basically. Not based on the quality of the card. The card's just great. Next we have Starsteel Daisho. That's like the 6-drop basically is another more contentious point. I see way too many lists that run 1 to 0 Daishos, which I think is terribly, terribly wrong. Especially if I see lists with like 2 Maul and 1 Daisho. I don't get it. Like, I tried both cards. There's rarely any situation where Maul is significantly better than Daisho. Like, people keep claiming that there's these situations where you want to like finish people through blockers with Maul. Like, I don't know what they are talking about. This is a control deck. Like, if my opponent has a lot of board, I probably won't have them low enough to kill them with anything. And if they have board, I rather have most efficient ways to control their board and fight their board, or like fight or keep their board from even getting that far. And like, harsh roll into Daisho is so brutal. Daisho is so good at controlling the board and also so good at killing people on an empty board. Or like, you have a Daisho in play, like board is empty, you equip a Daisho, hit the opponent twice. Opponent plays 1 or 2 units. Your turn, harsh roll. Hit them twice in the face. If that doesn't kill them, it puts them so low, and they are so low in resources at that point that they maybe just like present 1 more unit, you kill the unit and then kill the player. The card is just so great. Also has high armor, high base armor. Gets better with Armorsmith's favor, and especially Warden. Like, Warden into Daisho is just such a brutally stabilizing or even like pressuring play if the opponent is like on the back foot. It's just great. And between Artisan, Warcry triggers, and Rise, the deck is also usually fairly good at getting it to like 5 to 7 strength, which kills most of the relevant units in the game. And worst case, you often with like Warden into Daisho have enough armor to hit some of the bigger units twice, like the higher health units twice, and that occasionally even without Daisho dying. So if my Daisho like double hit trades with a Titan, for example, or stuff like that, a lot of the time like my Maul would like trade with the Titan still, for example. And yeah, Maul is just like such an underpowered 6-cost card, while Daisho is like a brutal powerhouse. Like, and it's not only based on theory. Like, I tested both, and I like paid attention to if and when Maul would be better, especially like vastly better, and if the situations occur enough to put such a so much weaker and less powerful, less flexible card in my deck, and it's just not worth it in my opinion. Like these situations are like such rare corner cases, and actually I have basically yet to encounter one where I really wish I had a Maul in my deck. Like, I had no situation yet where I wish I had a Maul in my deck. I had situations where I was thinking like, yeah, Maul would probably be a bit better now than Daisho, but never that I was like, yeah, I want the Maul right now. It's like, just didn't happen yet. And I don't think it will in an amount that matters at all. Like, Maul is just such an underpowered card, basically. I mean, there's a reason why Maul is an uncommon with 3 armor, and this is a legendary with 4 armor that gives you the super unique ability of attacking twice. It, like, Throne Warden into Daisho takes over so many boards alone. If they have like a bunch of medium-sized units, you just start like shredding away their board. Like before, even against Shido, like if you manage to like hang on till like Warden and then drop a Daisho after, Daisho is like where the game starts like going sideways for the Jido player. Granted, it's not particularly important anymore, but still like it's the same against like Shimmerpack, for example. Like I rather have Warden into Daisho than Warden into Maul against Shimmerpack, because I just want to like start tearing their board up before they like overrun me or like Shimmerpack me to death. And Daisho just allows me to pick off 2 of their random small low strength units per turn. It's just, yeah, the card is just absurd, and Warden into Daisho is like one of the most powerful plays this deck has. Play more Daishos, guys, and play less Mauls. Maul is just a weak, underpowered card the deck does not need at all, in my opinion. And if you try it, you will see. And last but not least, we have Icaria. I have tried anything from 0 to 2, which is about the number you usually find in decks. 2 is kind of rare. Paz actually turned me onto trying to Icaria after I was running 0 at the time, because I kind of felt she's probably a bit of a win more card. And yeah, basically Paz vouching for it and doing pretty well with 2 Icarias, and the fact that hitting Icaria with Quarry to like drop Icaria on 6 are both like were both pretty compelling arguments. I decided to like try 2 Icarias, and I like it so far. Like Icaria is a pretty nice like proactive power play when the game is kind of like at a standstill because you dealt with the majority of the onslaught from the opponent, but you don't really have anything going yet, and the game is kind of stable. Then you just drop an Icaria and she just like powers through the game. And or even sometimes if you're slightly behind on a board that is soft to like an Icaria, you just drop Icaria, suddenly your opponent can't attack anymore and is under a ton of pressure, and if they don't deal with Icaria right away, the game basically ends. So it's just pretty good at like giving the deck some more proactive punch and just some more like sort of free win potential, where you just don't have to like grind them out fair and square and like deal with everything they have. At some point you just like, alright, I like played the control game long enough, there you have my 1-2 punch, deal with this Icaria or the game ends right now. And yeah, people are often not that well equipped to deal with Icaria anymore. So yeah, so far I really like the 2 Icaria. Gives the deck a little more free win and proactive power potential, which has felt good so far. So I can definitely recommend it. With 0 Icaria, I was struggling a lot more with like falling behind to a point where it was hard to stabilize and take over, where Icaria would have done a lot, or like put away games fast enough before the opponent like top decked out of the situation and out top decked me and won and stuff like that. Alright, last but not least, we have the power base. Power base is basically set up to have a ton of justice for like turn 1 Inspire and all our early justice and like the double justice on 4 and 5. And also for Icaria and Daisho. And as much like fire as we can fit in for Icaria. It's definitely on the low side here, but can't get it any better than that. And as much shadow as is reasonably possible to support turn 2 Quarry. Like to consistently play Quarry, like have 1 shadow by turn 2, we need like 16 shadow. Currently we have 15. 4 Seek, 4 Seed of Vengeance, 4 Seed of Chaos 12, 1 Shadow Sigil 13, and 2 Stone Scarbanner. Like basically everybody runs this setup except the 2 Stone Scarbanner. So people run like a turn 2 play that you want to play on, actually want to play on turn 2 as often as possible with 13 shadow, which is far from enough. So yeah, the solution is basically, which your deck can handle pretty well actually, is just add 2 Stone Scarbanner over 2 Fire Sigil and then your power is fine. You have 15 shadow, which gives you like probably 85-ish% chance to have 85 to 90% chance to have shadow on 2. So usually when you have a Quarry in your opening hand, you can play it on turn 2, which is great. And there's even like enough units in the deck that a lot of the time Stone Scarbanner will even be not depleted, or you can just play it on turn 1 depleted when you have nothing better to do anyway. And it sometimes is like a better top deck than a Seed would be, simply because, yeah, you have a unit in play but no Sigil in hand anymore, so Stone Scarbanner off the top. Undepleted power to curve out, great. So yeah, I really like the banner. I think a third would be too much. Like I could see running 3, but that would only be possible if we basically don't run Rolant's favor. Like if we play 2 Justice Sigil over the Rolant's favor, we could like cut another Fire Sigil for Stone Scarbanner, or we could like cut 2 Rolant's favor for 1 Justice Sigil and 1 Argenport banner to add a 16th shadow, which is a very reasonable thing to do. Having less power that enters depleted or costs you power like favor definitely makes the deck more consistent and smoother at curving out up to like 6 or 7. So that is definitely a reasonable option, but so far I kind of like the little additional flood protection value from favor over the pure sigil approach, but that is actually like a very reasonable approach that has its own benefits. But yeah, with the Armorsmith's favor is slightly more appealing to me than more straight up sigils and an extra shadow influence basically. Alright. That sums up the deck for now. As usual, I will play 6 games with the deck. On ladder, I'm currently in 3rd place in ladder, so you can see the deck in action at the highest level of ranked. We'll split it as usual over 2 videos. Thanks for watching, stay tuned for the first half of the games in a moment.